The morning sun painted golden streaks across the Alabama sky as General Patricia Williams checked her watch one last time before starting her car. At 52 years old, she had seen more battles and made more difficult decisions than most people could imagine in their entire lifetime. Her modest gray sedan sat in the hotel parking lot, looking like any other ordinary car, but the woman behind the wheel was anything but ordinary. Patricia had spent 25 years of her life serving the United States Army with unwavering dedication and honor. She started as a young lieutenant fresh out of military academy, with dreams of making a real difference in the world. Back then, many people doubted whether a young black woman could succeed in the military, but Patricia proved them all wrong through sheer determination and exceptional leadership skills. Her journey to becoming a general was filled with challenges that would have broken weaker spirits. She served 3 tours of duty overseas in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. During her first deployment, she led a team of soldiers through hostile territory for 6 days straight without proper sleep or adequate supplies. Her quick thinking and brave decisions saved dozens of lives that week and earned her the first of many commendations that would follow throughout her career. The ribbons and medals on her dress uniform told stories of courage under fire, heroic rescues, and strategic victories that helped protect American interests around the world. Each piece of metal and fabric represented months of hard work, sacrifice, and moments when she had to make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death for the soldiers under her command. But today, General Williams was not wearing her impressive uniform with all its decorations. Instead, she had chosen to dress in simple civilian clothes for her journey. She wore a neat blue blouse and dark pants, with comfortable shoes suitable for the long day ahead. Her decision to travel in civilian clothing was not made lightly. Military protocols sometimes required high-ranking officers to avoid drawing unnecessary attention while traveling, especially when moving through areas where their presence might create security concerns. The small town of Millbrook, Alabama, seemed peaceful enough as she studied the map on her phone. American flags hung proudly from front porches, and local businesses displayed yellow ribbon magnets and signs reading "Support our troops" in their windows. It was the kind of place where military service was respected and honored, or at least that was what Patricia hoped as she prepared to drive through on her way to inspect a nearby training facility. Her mission was straightforward but important. The Pentagon had sent her to evaluate the progress of a new training program designed to prepare soldiers for modern warfare challenges. The facility she was headed to had been struggling with some operational issues, and her expertise was needed to identify problems and recommend solutions. It was exactly the kind of assignment that made her proud to serve her country. As General Williams pulled out of the hotel parking lot, she thought about the young soldiers she would meet later that day. Many of them were probably around the same age she had been when she first put on the uniform. She remembered her own nervousness and excitement during those early days, and how much it had meant to have experienced officers who believed in her potential. The drive ahead would take her through several small towns before reaching the military installation. She expected it to be a quiet, peaceful journey through the heart of America. The GPS showed clear roads and good weather conditions. Everything seemed perfect for a smooth trip that would allow her to arrive early and prepare thoroughly for her important inspection duties. Patricia adjusted her rearview mirror and checked her seatbelt one final time. She had no way of knowing that this ordinary Tuesday morning drive would soon become one of the most challenging and eye-opening experiences of her distinguished military career. Officer Jake Morrison had been patrolling the quiet streets of Millbrook for 8 long years, and he thought he knew everything about his small Alabama town. At 34 years old, he had developed what he believed were sharp instincts for spotting trouble before it started. This Tuesday morning seemed like any other ordinary day until he noticed the gray sedan with out-of-state license plates driving slowly through what he considered his neighborhood. Something about the car immediately caught his attention and made him suspicious. The vehicle looked too clean and well-maintained for someone just passing through town. The driver seemed to be looking around as if searching for something, or maybe checking out houses for reasons that made Jake uncomfortable. In his mind, people who did not belong in Millbrook usually meant trouble, and this particular driver definitely did not belong here. Jake had grown up in this same town where his father and grandfather had lived their entire lives. He knew every family, every business owner, and most of the regular visitors who came through on a weekly basis. Strangers, especially those driving cars with license plates from other states, always made him want to take a closer look. His training had taught him to trust his gut feelings, and right now his gut was telling him something was not right about this situation. The gray sedan continued down Oak Street, past the old courthouse and the small shops that lined the main square. Jake followed at a distance, watching the way the driver moved through town. The car was not speeding or breaking any traffic laws, but that did not matter to him. Sometimes the most dangerous people were the ones who tried hardest to blend in and appear normal. He had learned that lesson during his years on the force. Without hesitation, Jake reached over and flipped on his patrol car lights. The red and blue flashing colors reflected off the buildings and caught the attention of a few early morning shoppers who stopped to watch what was happening. He felt that familiar rush of authority and control that came with making a traffic stop. This was his town, his streets, and his responsibility to keep everyone safe from outsiders who might cause problems. General Patricia Williams saw the police lights in her rearview mirror and felt her heart sink slightly. She had been driving carefully and following all traffic laws, so she could not understand why she was being pulled over. Her military training kicked in immediately, and she began following the proper procedures for dealing with law enforcement. She put on her turn signal and slowly pulled her car to the right side of the street near the town square. Patricia turned off her engine and placed both hands clearly visible on the steering wheel, exactly as she had taught hundreds of soldiers to do during training exercises. She knew that traffic stops could be dangerous situations for everyone involved, and the best way to keep things calm was to follow proper protocol. Her years of military service had taught her to respect authority while also standing firm when she knew she was in the right. Through her side mirror, Patricia watched Officer Morrison get out of his patrol car and walk toward her vehicle. She noticed immediately that his body language was aggressive and hostile rather than professional. His hand rested near his weapon, and his facial expression showed anger rather than the neutral demeanor that good police officers usually maintain during routine stops. The morning sun was getting brighter, and Patricia could see other people starting to notice the scene unfolding in their quiet town square. A few shopkeepers stepped outside their stores to get a better look, while some drivers slowed down as they passed by. Patricia took a deep breath and prepared herself for what she hoped would be a brief and professional interaction that would end with a simple explanation and an apology for any misunderstanding that might have occurred. Officer Morrison approached the gray sedan with heavy footsteps that echoed off the quiet pavement. His black boots made sharp clicking sounds as he walked, and his leather utility belt creaked with each step. The morning air was still cool, but sweat was already forming on his forehead as adrenaline pumped through his system. He felt powerful and in control as he prepared to confront what he believed was a suspicious outsider who did not belong in his peaceful town. When Jake reached the driver's side window, he did not knock politely or announce himself professionally like proper police procedure required. Instead, he used his heavy metal flashlight to tap loudly against the glass, even though the bright morning sun made the flashlight completely unnecessary. The sharp tapping sound was meant to intimidate and show dominance rather than simply get the driver's attention. General Patricia Williams rolled down her window slowly and completely, keeping her hands visible at all times. She looked directly at Officer Morrison with calm, steady eyes and spoke in her clear, professional voice that had commanded respect from soldiers around the world. Her tone was polite but confident as she asked what seemed to be the problem and why she had been pulled over. Jake immediately felt threatened by her composed demeanor and professional way of speaking. He had expected her to be nervous or afraid like most people were during traffic stops, but instead she seemed completely in control of herself. This made him even more suspicious and angry, because in his mind, guilty people often tried to act innocent and calm when they were hiding something dangerous or illegal. His response was harsh and demanding as he asked her what she was doing driving through his town. His voice got louder with each word as he accused her of looking suspicious and probably being up to no good. He did not ask for her license and registration, like normal traffic stop procedures required. Instead, he immediately jumped to accusations and hostile questioning that had nothing to do with any actual traffic violations. Patricia tried to explain calmly that she was military personnel traveling for official government business. She spoke slowly and clearly, hoping to diffuse the growing tension by providing factual information about her purpose for being in town. Her years of dealing with difficult situations had taught her that remaining calm and professional was usually the best way to resolve conflicts before they escalated into something more serious. But Officer Morrison cut her off before she could finish explaining. He claimed that her story sounded made up, and that suspicious people always had elaborate excuses for why they were somewhere they did not belong. His prejudiced mind had already decided she was guilty of something, and he was not interested in hearing any explanations that might prove him wrong. The volume of his voice continued to increase as more people in the town square began to notice the commotion. Shop owners stepped outside their stores, and pedestrians stopped walking to watch what was happening. Some people seemed concerned about the aggressive tone of the officer, while others appeared to support him simply because he wore a badge and represented local authority. Jake ordered Patricia to step out of her vehicle immediately. His command was sharp and threatening, leaving no room for discussion or questions. He placed his hand closer to his weapon as he spoke, making it clear that he expected instant obedience without any resistance or delay. General Williams felt the familiar sting of discrimination that she had hoped to leave behind years ago. She recognized the tone and attitude from other encounters throughout her life and military career. Despite her decades of service, sacrifice, and achievement, this officer saw only her skin color and his own prejudiced assumptions about who belonged in his small southern town. General Patricia Williams stepped out of her gray sedan with the same dignified composure she had displayed during countless military ceremonies and high-pressure situations. Her movements were slow and deliberate, designed to show Officer Morrison that she posed no threat and was cooperating fully with his demands. She stood straight with her shoulders back, displaying the confident posture that had been drilled into her during decades of military service. Officer Morrison's eyes immediately focused on Patricia's civilian clothing, rather than listening to anything she was trying to explain. He saw a middle-aged black woman wearing a simple blue blouse and dark pants, instead of recognizing someone who had dedicated her entire adult life to serving and protecting the United States of America. His narrow-minded perspective prevented him from seeing past his own prejudiced assumptions about what a high-ranking military officer should look like. When Patricia calmly stated that she was an Army general traveling on official military business, Jake's reaction was immediate and insulting. He let out a loud laugh that echoed across the town square and shook his head as if she had just told him the most ridiculous lie he had ever heard. His laugh was cruel and mocking, designed to humiliate her in front of the growing crowd of onlookers who had gathered to watch the confrontation. Morrison scoffed loudly and told Patricia that she must think he was stupid if she expected him to believe such an obvious lie. He claimed that real generals wore fancy uniforms with lots of medals and drove expensive military vehicles with special license plates. In his limited understanding of the military, he could not imagine that high-ranking officers sometimes traveled in civilian clothes for security reasons, or that they might drive ordinary cars like regular citizens. The officer's voice grew even louder as he accused Patricia of being involved in some kind of criminal activity. He suggested that she was probably a drug dealer or involved in some other illegal business that brought her to his town. His accusations were based on nothing more than his own racist assumptions and his inability to believe that a black woman could achieve such a high position in the United States military. Patricia felt her jaw tighten as she listened to the officer's insulting words, but she maintained her professional demeanor. Her military training had taught her to stay calm under pressure and to never let emotions override good judgment, even when facing unfair treatment. She had dealt with discrimination throughout her career and had learned that responding with anger usually made difficult situations worse rather than better. As the confrontation continued, other police officers began arriving at the scene after Morrison called for backup on his radio. Patricia had hoped that additional officers might bring some professional perspective to the situation and help calm things down. Instead, the arriving officers seemed to feed off Morrison's hostile energy and began treating her with the same suspicion and disrespect. The backup officers formed a semicircle around Patricia, making her feel surrounded and trapped. None of them asked Morrison for details about why he had stopped her or what specific laws she was supposed to have broken. They simply assumed that their fellow officer must have good reasons for his actions and that Patricia must be guilty of something even though no evidence of any wrongdoing existed. One of the backup officers commented loudly that people who lied about being military personnel were committing serious crimes. Another officer nodded in agreement and suggested that Patricia was probably trying to get special treatment by making up stories about serving in the Army. Their comments showed complete ignorance about military culture and the serious consequences that would result from impersonating a military officer. The crowd of townspeople continued to grow as word spread about the confrontation happening in their town square. Some people were recording the scene with their cell phones while others whispered among themselves about what they thought might be happening. A few residents shook their heads in disapproval, but most seemed content to watch the drama unfold without interfering or speaking up for fairness and justice. Patricia realized that the situation was spiraling out of control and that these officers had no intention of listening to reason or treating her with the respect she deserved as both a human being and a decorated military veteran. Officer Morrison stepped closer to General Patricia Williams with an aggressive posture that was clearly meant to intimidate her into admitting what he believed were obvious lies. His face was red with anger and frustration as he demanded that she provide identification to prove her ridiculous claims about being a military general. He waved his hand dismissively as he spoke, making it clear that he expected her to confess that she had been lying about her military service. Patricia reached slowly into her purse, being careful to move deliberately and keep her hands visible at all times. She understood that sudden movements during police encounters could be dangerous, so she announced each action before she took it. Her years of military training had taught her proper procedures for dealing with law enforcement, and she was determined to follow protocol, even though these officers were treating her unfairly. When Patricia pulled out her official military identification card, Officer Morrison snatched it from her hand without even asking permission. The card clearly displayed her photograph, rank, and official military information that would have convinced any reasonable person of her identity and position. The identification was issued by the United States Department of Defense and contained multiple security features that made it impossible to fake or duplicate. But instead of examining the identification card carefully, Morrison barely glanced at it before declaring it was obviously fake. He claimed that anyone could get fake military identification cards made and that criminals often used fake credentials to try to get out of trouble with the police. His prejudiced mind had already decided that Patricia was guilty of something and no amount of evidence would change his opinion. Morrison waved the military ID card in the air and announced loudly to the other officers and growing crowd that Patricia was trying to use fake identification to deceive them. He suggested that possession of fake military credentials was probably a serious federal crime that would result in her going to prison for a long time. His accusations were becoming more dramatic and theatrical as he played to the audience of townspeople who had gathered to watch. The backup officers nodded in agreement with their colleague without bothering to examine the identification themselves. None of them had enough knowledge about military identification to recognize that Patricia's card was completely legitimate and authentic. They simply trusted Morrison's judgment and assumed that he must know what he was talking about when he claimed the identification was fake. Patricia tried to explain that her identification was completely real and that they could easily verify her military status by making a simple phone call to the appropriate authorities. She offered to provide additional information that would prove her identity and position, but the officers were not interested in hearing facts that contradicted their predetermined conclusions about her guilt. Instead of listening to her reasonable suggestions, Officer Morrison made the decision to place Patricia under arrest. He claimed that she was guilty of using fake identification and lying to police officers during an official investigation. He pulled out his metal handcuffs and ordered her to turn around and place her hands behind her back immediately. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut around Patricia's wrists was heard clearly by everyone in the town square. The cold metal felt heavy and humiliating against her skin as she realized that her decades of military service and sacrifice meant absolutely nothing to these officers who saw only her race and their own prejudiced assumptions. She had commanded thousands of soldiers and made life or death decisions in combat zones, but now she was being treated like a common criminal. Several people in the crowd began taking photos and recording videos of the arrest with their cell phones. Some seemed shocked by what they were witnessing, while others appeared to support the officers' actions. Patricia could hear whispered conversations as people debated whether the arrest was justified or if something unfair was happening to an innocent person. The handcuffs were deliberately tightened more than necessary, making Patricia's hands tingle as her circulation was restricted. Officer Morrison seemed to take pleasure in her discomfort as he roughly guided her toward his patrol car. He announced loudly that she would be taken to the police station, where she would be properly processed and charged with her crimes. Patricia maintained her dignity and composure despite the humiliating treatment she was receiving. Her military training had prepared her for difficult situations, and she was determined not to give these officers the satisfaction of seeing her break down or lose control of her emotions, even though she felt angry and frustrated by their unprofessional behavior. General Patricia Williams stood beside the police patrol car with her hands secured behind her back in cold metal handcuffs that seemed to grow tighter with each passing minute. Despite the humiliating circumstances, she maintained the same dignified bearing that had earned her respect from military personnel around the world. Her voice remained calm and professional as she made a request that would soon change everything about this terrible situation. Patricia looked directly at Officer Morrison and stated clearly that she wanted to make her one permitted phone call. She explained that as someone who had been arrested, she had legal rights that included the ability to contact someone who could help resolve this obvious misunderstanding. Her tone was steady and confident, showing no signs of the anger and frustration that were building inside her heart. Morrison seemed annoyed by her request, but he knew that denying someone their right to make a phone call could create legal problems for him later. He probably expected Patricia to call a local lawyer or maybe a family member who would come to the police station to bail her out. In his mind, this would be just another routine arrest that would end with paperwork and a court date in a few weeks. The officer reluctantly removed Patricia's cell phone from her purse and held it while she carefully recited a phone number from memory. Morrison had no way of knowing that the number she was calling would connect directly to one of the most secure and important communications centers in the United States government. The number was not listed in any public directory and was known only to a select group of high-ranking military officials. Patricia spoke clearly as she dialed the number that would reach the Pentagon duty office in Washington, D.C. This was the same office that coordinated military operations around the world and maintained direct communication with generals and other senior officers at all times. The duty officer who answered the phone was trained to handle emergency situations and had immediate access to personnel records for every military leader in the country. When the call connected, Patricia identified herself using her full military rank serial number and security clarification code. She spoke with the precise military terminology that only someone with real experience and authority would know. Her voice carried the unmistakable tone of command that came from years of leading soldiers in combat zones and high-pressure situations around the world. The Pentagon duty officer immediately recognized Patricia's voice and confirmed her identity within seconds. The computer systems at the Pentagon contained detailed records of every military officer, including photographs, current assignments, and security clearances. There was absolutely no doubt that the person on the phone was exactly who she claimed to be. Patricia explained her current situation using clear military language that described her location and the circumstances of her detention. She provided the exact address of where she was being held and the names of the officers who had arrested her. Her report was factual and professional without any emotional language or personal complaints about the treatment she was receiving. The duty officer at the Pentagon began taking immediate action even before Patricia finished explaining the situation. Emergency protocols were activated that would notify senior military leadership and government officials about the detention of a high-ranking general. Phone calls were made to the Secretary of Defense, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and other powerful people who would demand answers about why one of their most respected officers was sitting in handcuffs in a small Alabama town. Officer Morrison began to notice that Patricia was speaking with unusual authority and precision. Her conversation included military terms and security protocols that sounded authentic and professional. She mentioned specific Pentagon procedures and used official government terminology that would be impossible for someone to fake without real military experience and high-level security clearance. The other officers standing nearby also began to look uncomfortable as they overheard fragments of Patricia's phone conversation. She was discussing official military business and referencing federal agencies in ways that suggested she really did have the kind of high-level connections that could create serious problems for local police officers who had made a terrible mistake. Within minutes of Patricia's phone call, the Pentagon duty office had initiated a chain of communications that would reach some of the most powerful people in the United States government. Military officials were demanding immediate explanations from local authorities, while federal agencies were being notified about the illegal detention of a decorated general who was traveling on official business. The phone call that Officer Morrison had reluctantly allowed was about to transform a routine traffic stop into a national incident with consequences that would extend far beyond the quiet streets of Millbrook, Alabama. Officer Jake Morrison felt his confidence beginning to crack as he listened more carefully to General Patricia Williams speaking on her phone call. The military terminology and official language she was using sounded far too authentic and detailed to be something a regular person could fake. She was discussing Pentagon protocols, security clearances, and official military procedures with the kind of precision that only came from years of real experience at the highest levels of government service. The other officers who had gathered around the scene were also starting to look uncomfortable and uncertain. They could hear Patricia mentioning specific departments within the Pentagon and referencing federal agencies that handled military operations around the world. Her conversation included details about security codes and official procedures that would be impossible for a civilian to know unless they really did have high-level military clearance. Morrison began to feel a cold knot forming in his stomach as he realized that maybe he had made a serious mistake. The woman he had dismissed as a liar and possible criminal was speaking with an authority that suggested she really might be exactly who she claimed to be. If she was telling the truth about being a general, then he had just arrested one of the most senior military officers in the United States Army. The backup officers started whispering among themselves as they began to understand the gravity of what might be happening. None of them had questioned Morrison's decision to make the arrest because they trusted his judgment and assumed he must have good reasons. Now they were starting to realize that they might all be involved in a situation that could destroy their careers and create serious legal problems for their entire department. 20 minutes after Patricia's phone call, Officer Morrison's radio crackled to life with an urgent message from the police station. The voice coming through the radio belonged to Chief Robert Henderson, who sounded more angry and stressed than Morrison had ever heard him before. The chief's words were sharp and demanding as he ordered Morrison to respond immediately to an emergency situation. Chief Henderson had just finished one of the most difficult phone calls of his entire career. Federal authorities from Washington, D.C. had contacted him directly to demand an explanation for why one of his officers had detained a high-ranking military general who was traveling on official government business. The caller had made it clear that General Williams was a decorated war veteran with an impeccable record of service to her country. Morrison's hands shook slightly as he picked up his radio to respond to the chief's urgent call. He could hear the barely controlled anger in Henderson's voice and knew that whatever was happening was far more serious than anything he had ever dealt with before. The chief demanded to know immediately why Morrison had arrested someone without proper cause and why he had not followed standard procedures for verifying identification. The blood drained from Morrison's face as Chief Henderson explained over the radio that he had just received calls from the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, and several other federal agencies. All of them were demanding answers about the illegal detention of General Patricia Williams, who was one of the most respected officers in the United States military. The chief's voice was tight with anger as he realized how much trouble this incident was going to cause for his department. Morrison tried to explain that he had suspected the woman of criminal activity and that her identification had looked fake to him. But even as he spoke the words, he could hear how weak and foolish his explanation sounded. He had not followed proper procedures for verifying identification and had made assumptions based on nothing more than his own prejudiced views about who could be a military general. The other officers began backing away from Morrison as they realized he had involved them all in a situation that could end their careers. They had supported his decision to make the arrest without asking questions or demanding evidence of any actual crimes. Now they were all going to face consequences for participating in what was clearly an illegal detention based on racial profiling and discrimination. Chief Henderson ordered Morrison to release General Williams immediately and to provide her with a formal apology on behalf of the entire police department. He also warned that there would be a full investigation into Morrison's conduct and that federal authorities were already on their way to town to interview everyone involved in the incident. Morrison's career was flashing before his eyes as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. He had let his prejudices and assumptions cloud his judgment and had violated the rights of someone who had dedicated her life to serving and protecting the United States. The consequences of his actions were going to extend far beyond his own career and would likely affect his entire department and community. The scene in the town square had attracted even more attention as news of what was happening began to spread through social media and local news networks. People were starting to understand that they had witnessed something much more serious than a routine traffic stop and that their small town was about to become the center of a national conversation about police misconduct and racial discrimination. News of the incident spread through official government channels with the speed and urgency of a national security alert. Within 1 hour of General Patricia Williams making her phone call to the Pentagon, dozens of high-ranking military officials and federal authorities had been notified about the illegal detention of one of America's most decorated generals. The story was moving through social media platforms even faster as cell phone videos of the arrest began appearing online. Officer Morrison's hands trembled as he removed the handcuffs from General Williams' wrists. The metal restraints that had seemed so necessary just an hour earlier now felt like evidence of his own ignorance and prejudice. Patricia rubbed her wrists gently where the cuffs had been too tight, but maintained her dignified composure, even as she was finally being released from the humiliating detention. Chief Robert Henderson arrived at the town square within minutes of learning about the situation. His face was pale and drawn as he approached General Williams with the kind of respectful posture that should have been shown to her from the very beginning. He offered profuse apologies on behalf of his entire department, while knowing that no amount of words could undo the damage that had already been done to both her dignity and his department's reputation. The chief explained to Patricia that he had just finished speaking with officials from the Department of Defense who had provided detailed information about her distinguished military record. He had learned about her 3 tours of duty overseas, her numerous commendations for bravery under fire, and her current assignment to inspect military training facilities. The contrast between her actual accomplishments and the way she had been treated was both shocking and embarrassing for everyone involved. Mayor Sarah Collins received an urgent phone call at her office and immediately drove to the scene when she learned what had happened in her town. As an elected official, she understood that this incident could seriously damage the community's reputation and its relationship with nearby military installations. The town of Millbrook depended on good relationships with federal agencies and military personnel for economic development and federal funding. When Mayor Collins arrived, she approached General Williams with the same respectful demeanor that the chief had shown. She offered a formal apology from the entire city government and expressed her deep concern about the way a distinguished military officer had been treated in their community. She promised that there would be a full investigation and that steps would be taken to prevent similar incidents from happening in the future. Local news crews began arriving at the town square as word spread about the dramatic incident involving a high-ranking military general and accusations of police misconduct. Television reporters set up their cameras and began interviewing witnesses who had watched the confrontation unfold. The story was already being picked up by regional news outlets and would soon be reported by national media organizations. Social media posts about the incident were being shared thousands of times as people expressed outrage about the way General Williams had been treated. Cell phone videos taken by bystanders showed the professional way she had handled herself during the arrest and the hostile attitude displayed by the officers. The contrast between her dignity and their unprofessional behavior was clear for everyone to see. Federal investigators were already on their way to Millbrook to conduct interviews and gather evidence about the incident. The Department of Justice would be looking into possible civil rights violations, while military officials would be examining whether any federal laws had been broken during the detention of a general who was traveling on official business. The investigation would be thorough and could result in serious consequences for everyone involved. Officer Morrison stood apart from the other officials, looking isolated and defeated as he began to understand the full scope of what his actions had triggered. His fellow officers were avoiding eye contact with him as they realized that their association with the incident could affect their own careers. The backup officers who had supported his decision to make the arrest were now questioning their own judgment and wondering how they could have been so wrong. General Williams handled the situation with the same grace and professionalism that she had demonstrated throughout her military career. She accepted the apologies from local officials while making it clear that this incident represented a larger problem that needed to be addressed. Her response was measured and thoughtful, showing the kind of leadership qualities that had earned her respect from soldiers and civilians alike. The crowd of townspeople who had gathered to watch the drama continued to grow as more people heard about what was happening. Some residents seemed ashamed and embarrassed that their community had been involved in such an incident, while others were beginning to ask difficult questions about the attitudes and training of their local police force. The conversation was already shifting from this specific incident to broader issues about fairness and justice in their community. The incident in Millbrook, Alabama, became a catalyst for important conversations about racial profiling and the treatment of military service members across the United States. Within days, the story had been featured on national news programs and had sparked discussions in communities from coast to coast about the ongoing challenges faced by people of color, even those who had dedicated their lives to serving their country through military service. Officer Jake Morrison was immediately suspended from duty pending a full investigation by both local authorities and federal agencies. The Department of Justice launched a comprehensive review of his actions to determine whether civil rights violations had occurred during his detention of General Patricia Williams. The investigation would examine not only this specific incident, but also Morrison's entire record as a police officer to determine if there had been a pattern of discriminatory behavior. Within 2 weeks of the incident, Morrison was formally charged with violating General Williams' civil rights under federal law. The charges carried serious penalties, including possible prison time and the permanent loss of his law enforcement certification. His actions had not only destroyed his own career, but had also brought shame and negative attention to his entire department and community. The other officers who had supported Morrison's decision to arrest General Williams faced disciplinary action and mandatory retraining on proper procedures for interacting with military personnel and members of minority communities. The police department implemented new policies requiring officers to properly verify identification before making arrests and to receive additional training on recognizing and preventing racial bias in their law enforcement activities. General Williams used the incident as an opportunity to educate others about the challenges still faced by minority service members in the modern military. She spoke at conferences and military academies around the country, sharing her experiences and encouraging young people to pursue military careers despite the obstacles they might encounter. Her dignity and professionalism during the incident had made her a powerful symbol of resilience and grace under pressure. The town of Millbrook established new training programs for their police force that focused on cultural sensitivity and proper interaction with military personnel. They also created a civilian oversight committee to review police conduct and ensure that similar incidents would not happen in the future. The community recognized that this incident had exposed serious problems that needed to be addressed through education and policy changes. Mayor Sarah Collins worked closely with military officials to rebuild the relationship between her community and nearby military installations. She understood that the incident had damaged trust that would take years to repair, and that the economic impact on her town could be significant if military personnel chose to avoid the area. Her efforts included public forums where community members could discuss their concerns and learn about the contributions made by military families. The incident also prompted changes at the state level as lawmakers introduced legislation requiring all police officers to receive training on military culture and proper procedures for interacting with service members. The bill was named in honor of General Williams and was designed to prevent similar incidents from occurring in other communities across the state. General Williams continued her distinguished military career, but the incident had left her with mixed feelings about the progress that had been made in addressing racial discrimination in American society. She had hoped that her decades of service and achievement would shield her from the kind of prejudice she had experienced as a young woman, but the encounter in Millbrook proved that bias and discrimination were still very real problems that affected people at all levels of society. The story became a case study used in police academies and military training programs to illustrate the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect, regardless of their race or appearance. It demonstrated how quickly a routine situation could escalate into a national incident when officers allowed prejudice to override their professional judgment and training. Years later, the incident was still remembered as an important moment in the ongoing struggle for civil rights and equal treatment under the law. General Williams had turned a painful and humiliating experience into an opportunity for positive change in education. Her example showed that even in the face of injustice, it was possible to respond with grace, dignity, and a commitment to making things better for future generations. The transformation of Officer Morrison from a confident authority figure to a disgraced former police officer served as a warning to others about the serious consequences of allowing racial bias to influence their professional decisions. His fall from grace demonstrated that discrimination and prejudice would not be tolerated in modern law enforcement, and that officers who violated people's civil rights would face serious legal and professional consequences for their actions.